Hello everyone, my name is Alex and you are on the Classic Cars Roast channel. Prepare yourselves because today's subject is a fascinating disaster. 1957 DeSoto Adventurer. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of the golden age of American automobiles, the DeSoto Adventurer certainly doesn't spring to mind. This car, with its gaudy tail fins and questionable engineering choices, is a prime example of how far the mighty have fallen since the last great year, 1970. Let's talk numbers. The Adventurer was packing a hefty 345 cubic inch displacement engine that, on paper, churned out an impressive 345 horsepower. But wait, this isn't the gross figure from some vintage brochure. It's the reality of the muscle car era's decline. You see, the horsepower you think you're getting is more of a mirage, especially when you consider the pathetic torque figures and the overall performance that could only be described as adequate at best. And when you take a hard look at the market today, prices for well-preserved specimens are hitting the stratosphere. Auction prices ranging from $100,000 to $200,000, absurd for a car that once would have been laughed at in a junkyard. The Adventurer's appeal lies in its brutal charm. But let's be honest, it's a hooligan streak wrapped in chrome and leather that's barely holding it all together. The interior? Luxurious, sure, with leather-upholstered seats and a dashboard layout that was modern for its time. But don't be fooled. The electrical systems are notorious for their voltage regulation problems, leaving you praying your car will start every time you turn that key. And while we're at it, let's not forget about the common rust issues plaguing these beauties. Lower quarters, trunk floors, and wheel wells. It's like a buffet of decay waiting to ruin your day. Now, if you're thinking about diving into the market for one of these, be prepared to pay a premium for the originality doctrine. Remember, it's only original once. That's the mantra you need to keep in mind while navigating the outrageous prices. But if you find one in decent shape that doesn't look like it just survived a demolition derby, you might just have yourself a piece of automotive history. So, what do you think? Would you be willing to shell out the cash for this fascinating disaster? The creation story of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer is just as tangled and disappointing as the car itself. Picture this: a time when American automotive manufacturers were riding high, churning out big, flashy vehicles that screamed, "Look at me!" The Adventurer was supposed to embody that spirit, but instead, it ended up being a half-hearted attempt to compete with the likes of Cadillac and Lincoln. What did they think? That throwing on some chrome and calling it a luxury model would cut it? Spoiler alert, it didn't. Now consider the context of the era. The 1950s were a golden age for American cars, a time when the competition was fierce and high-compression V8 engines ruled the roads. The last great year for that performance magic was 1970, and by the time the Adventurer came around, the malaise was already creeping in. Sure, it had a flashy name and a bold design that tried to capture the forward-look ethos of Chrysler, but the reality was a far cry from the glory days. With its 345 cubic inch displacement engine, it produced a gross horsepower that sounds impressive until you realize it was just a pathetic 345 horsepower. The torque figures were decent at around 370 lb-ft, but let's not kid ourselves. This isn't the kind of power that gets your heart racing. The body design, with those exaggerated tail fins and a pronounced grille, was an attempt at making a statement, but it came off more like a desperate cry for attention. And the interior? Luxurious, they said. Leather seats with gold accents, a twin-pod instrument cluster that was modern for the time. What they don't tell you is that behind that facade, the electrical systems were notoriously unreliable, plagued by voltage regulation problems that could turn a leisurely drive into a roadside nightmare. Rust issues were common too, especially on the lower quarters and trunk floors. When you look at the production numbers, it's clear that the Adventurer was more of a fleeting moment than a lasting legacy. It was a model that had potential but ultimately fell victim to the market dynamics of the time, a sad reflection of how quickly things can go south in the automotive world. So here we are, left with a car that was designed to dazzle but instead ended up being a footnote in the annals of automotive history. Would you pay top dollar for a car that had such a lackluster story? I certainly wouldn't. All right, folks, strap in as we dive headfirst into the exterior of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer. Now, don't get too excited. This is where the charm starts to wear thin and the reality hits like a brick wall. Just look at those colors. Sure, you've got options like Surf White and Adventurer Gold, but they're just shiny coats trying to cover up a world of mediocrity underneath. The two-tone schemes might have turned heads back in the day, but now they scream desperate attempts to distract from the overall design flaws. Speaking of design, the body lines on this beast are a mixed bag of awkwardness. The pronounced tail fins, which were supposed to evoke a sense of speed and luxury, instead come off as cartoonish. They're about as subtle as a sledgehammer, and while some may call them iconic, I argue they're nothing more than a gimmick to mask a lack of cohesive design. The overall silhouette feels bloated and overdone, like a kid who raided his mom's closet and threw on everything at once. Now let's talk about the grille. The 1957 model featured a pronounced grille that was meant to align with the Chrysler forward look design. But let's be honest, it looks more like a toothy grin from a car that just had a bad dental experience. It's big, it's bold, but honestly, it's pretty dreadful. And those bumpers? The bumpers. Large, chrome-plated, and uniquely shaped, they're trying really hard to be the shining armor of this car, yet they just end up looking clunky and misplaced. It's like they were designed for a completely different vehicle and just slapped onto this one without any thought. Now don't even get me started on the build quality. You've got rust spots popping up like unwanted weeds on the lower quarters, trunk floors, and around those wheel wells. Those exaggerated fins might have been a selling point back in the day, but now they're just a reminder of what happens when cars are designed for style over substance. All this chrome and flash can't hide the fact that the engineering behind it is a joke. The panel gaps are laughable, and the comically thick door seals, they do nothing but mask poor craftsmanship. So, if you're thinking about adding this to your collection, ask yourself, do you want a car that looks like it's been through a rough patch? For me, a vehicle with such glaring flaws in its exterior is a hard pass. I'd rather take my chances with something that's at least got a fighting chance in the looks department. All right, folks, it's time to dive into the interior of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer, and let me tell you, this is where the car really tries to sell you on the whole luxury pitch, but spoiler alert, it doesn't quite deliver. First off, the dashboard layout is a so-called clean modern design for the era. And while that's true, it feels more like a desperate attempt to mask what's really going on. You've got this twin-pod instrument cluster that looks nice and all, but let's be real. How functional is it? The push-button transmission controls? They feel gimmicky, like a half-hearted attempt to be futuristic without actually delivering on the experience. What do you think? Is that really progress or just a sad imitation of better designs? Now let's talk about the smell. You know that distinct aroma of old leather and vintage upholstery? It's a mix of nostalgia and neglect, and in this case, it's more neglect than anything else. The luxurious leather-upholstered seats with those gaudy gold and white accents might have been eye-catching in the showroom, but they age like milk left out in the sun. You'll find yourself sitting on cracked leather, and that's if you're lucky. I mean, who doesn't love a little vintage charm? But when it's accompanied by the scent of mildew, it becomes a hard pass for me. Then there's the comfort factor. Sure, the seats look plush, but they're not exactly designed for long hauls. You'll feel like you're sinking into a luxurious pit of despair after just an hour of driving. And don't even get me started on the electrical issues. Period-specific systems are notorious for voltage regulation problems, which means you might be in for a surprise when the lights flicker or the radio decides to join the party at the worst moment. Now let's get into the options. You do have that gold anodized horn ring on the steering wheel, which is kind of cool, but is it enough to redeem this interior? Minimalistic center dash metalwork is nice, but it lacks the flair that you'd expect from a car that's trying to be a showstopper. It's like the adventurer is wearing a tuxedo but forgot to put on the bow tie. In conclusion, while the interior of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer has its moments of charm, they're overshadowed by the reality of age and neglect. For me, it's a huge letdown. Would I spend my money on this? Not a chance. But if you're a die-hard classic car enthusiast who can overlook these glaring flaws, Maybe you'll see the potential hidden within this vintage rolling museum piece. Just remember, it's only original once, and that's the only way I'd even consider it. All right, folks, here we go. The engine. This is where the drama really unfolds with the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer. Strap in because you're in for a ride. Under the hood, we've got a hefty 345 cubic inch displacement powerhouse. Sounds impressive, right? Well, hold on to your hats because this is where the fantasy starts to crumble. This beast was supposed to be the high-performance hero of its time. But what do we get? A mere 345 horsepower gross. That's right, folks, gross horsepower, not the net. Why? Because in the Malaise era, they didn't care to delineate those figures. So what does that translate to in the real world? A sad, pathetic horsepower rating that barely holds a candle to what we've come to expect from classic American muscle. And torque? We're looking at around 370 pound-feet. Sure, it sounds decent, but let's be real here. This is the age of high-compression V8s. Back in 1970, we were still reveling in the glory of powerhouses, and here we are, stuck with a torque rating that's about as inspiring as a wet blanket. Sure, it can propel the car, but you'll be waiting for the excitement that never quite arrives. Now, let's talk about the automatic transmission. It's a 3-speed Torque-A-Flight automatic, which is a solid choice, but you know what? It's not the Turbo Hydromatic 400. That's the best automatic transmission ever built, and to even mention this one in the same breath is an insult. The Torque-Flight may get you down the road, but it won't have you grinning from ear to ear like the Turbo Hydromatic would. And what about the performance numbers? 0 to 60 miles per hour in 8.5 seconds. That was all right for its time, but come on. In an era where we had cars that could take off like rockets, this felt like a leisurely Sunday drive. And the quarter mile in 16.2 seconds? Please, that's barely adequate for anything other than justifying a trip to the grocery store. So, what do you think? Is this engine a triumph or a tragedy? For me, it's a disappointment. If you're looking for raw power or exhilarating performance, you'll find yourself sorely lacking with this model. The nostalgia and style can only take you so far, and when the rubber meets the road, this engine just doesn't deliver. Would I spend my hard-earned cash on this? Not a chance. All right, folks, now we're diving into the mechanics of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer, and trust me, this is where the baffling decisions start piling up like a bad joke. First off, let's talk about the 3-speed Torque-Flight automatic transmission. Now, I'm not saying it's the worst unit out there, but let's be real. It's not exactly the Turbo Hydromatic 400, which is without a doubt the best automatic transmission ever built. The Torque-Flight is like that kid in school who tries really hard but just can't keep up with the cool kids. It was decent for its time, sure, but it lacks the smoothness and reliability you'd expect from a car that's supposed to scream luxury and performance. The shifts can be clunky, and it just doesn't inspire confidence. Now, what really gets me riled up is the rear axle ratios. The Adventurer came with a 3.31 to 1 ratio, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a letdown. Back in the day, you'd expect a performance car to have a more aggressive setup to match that supposedly high-performance image. Instead, they opted for a configuration that's more suited for highway cruising than spirited acceleration. So, if you were hoping to feel that rush when you stomp on the gas, think again. This mechanical choice feels like a half-hearted effort, as if they were trying to straddle the line between performance and comfort without committing to either. What's even more perplexing is that this car was marketed as a high-performance trim. With that kind of branding, you'd think they'd have thrown in something that could actually back it up. Instead, you get a transmission that feels like it's just going through the motions and a rear axle that's more about smooth sailing than thrilling dives into curves. It's like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, but ended up with a soggy slice of disappointment. Now, I know some will argue that the Torque-Flight was a reliable choice for many, but come on. If you're driving a DeSoto Adventurer, you're not looking for reliable. You're searching for excitement, raw power, and an unforgettable driving experience. The sad truth is the mechanical decisions here are emblematic of the Malaise era creeping in, where the thrills were being dialed back in favor of comfort and ease of driving. So, is this the kind of car you want to shell out big bucks for in today's market? Unless you're a die-hard collector or just love the brutal charm of it all, I'd say you might want to think twice. All right, folks, here we go. Time to rip the Band-Aid off and delve into the suspension, brakes, and handling feel of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer. Now, let's be brutally honest. If you're expecting the sort of finesse and road-holding prowess that cars from the mid-60s to early 70s delivered, prepare to be seriously disappointed. This car, while dripping with that brutal charm we love, is a glaring reminder of how far we fell during the malaise era. First up, the suspension. The Adventurer sports a front torsion bar setup that was a decent attempt at providing a smooth ride, but it's no miracle worker. You'll find that it fails to deliver the kind of responsiveness and agility that you'd expect from a car with its flashy looks. Instead, it feels as if you're piloting a ship rather than a sleek performance vehicle. The rear leaf springs? Don't even get me started. While they do provide some semblance of support, they're about as stiff as a board. You hit a bump, and the whole car shifts like a poorly made mattress. I mean, come on. For a car that wants to flaunt its power and luxury, this is just embarrassing. Now let's talk about the brakes. You'd expect something decent in a car that had a reputation for performance, but the drum brakes on the Adventurer are borderline pathetic. Sure, they might have worked fine in the 50s, but today? They feel like they're made of cardboard. You press the pedal, and instead of a confident stop, it's more like a suggestion to slow down. My biggest issue has always been the brakes. And with these, you'll be praying for a miracle every time you need to come to a halt. Handling, folks, is where the real tragedy unfolds. It's like trying to steer a battleship through a narrow canal. The steering is vague and at times downright lethargic. You'll find yourself oversteering on a turn, and the car just won't respond the way you want. It's a far cry from the mid-60s cars that handled much, much better. Honestly, it feels more like they built it for cruising the boulevard rather than carving up the corners. In summary, the suspension is a clunky affair, the brakes are a disaster waiting to happen, and the handling is just plain dreadful. So, if you're in the market for a classic that combines style with substance, I'd recommend looking elsewhere. Would I buy this car? Absolutely not. The nostalgia factor is there, but the driving experience? It's a hard pass. When we talk about reliability in the context of the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer, the words rock solid don't come to mind. Instead, you're looking at a car that carries the weight of some pretty significant reliability issues. If you think the romance of classic cars makes them infallible, think again. The electrical systems on these beauties are notorious for voltage regulation problems, and that's just scratching the surface. Add to that the power steering systems, which are prone to leaks like a sieve, and you start to see why owning one of these can be a gamble. Common rust spots plague the lower quarters, trunk floors, and wheel wells, turning what should be a charming ride into a potential rust bucket nightmare. For me, if I see rust on a classic, it's an immediate no thanks. So what's the verdict on the DeSoto Adventurer? It's a mixed bag, to say the least. On one hand, you have a vehicle that boasts a unique, audacious style with those iconic tail fins and that luxurious interior. On the other, you have a car that's riddled with reliability issues and a performance drop-off that makes you question whether it's worth the trouble. It's not exactly a car you'd want to daily drive, and if you take it to a show, you might find yourself praying it doesn't break down on the way there. Now, let's talk numbers. The market for these big iron machines is heating up, and if you come across a well-preserved example with low mileage, you could be looking at auction prices that range from $100,000 to $200,000. This isn't just a whim purchase, it's a financial commitment. With the rarity and appeal of these classics, particularly those that have retained originality, you might find a good investment, but remember my mantra, it's only original once. In conclusion, the 1957 DeSoto Adventurer is a car that embodies both the allure and pitfalls of classic car ownership. It's got that brutal charm and undeniable character, but don't be fooled into thinking it's all roses. If you find one in good condition for a good price, I'd say go for it, but be prepared for the quirks and the headaches that come with it. Would you spend your money on this classic, knowing what you might have to deal with? If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give it a like. Leave your comments and impressions. Your opinion is very important to me. Until next time.